Hello all. Today we will discuss chapter 9, Jainism and Buddhism. Numerous religious sects arose in the Middle Gangetic Basin in the 6th century BC. We hear of as many as 62 religious sects in this period. Many of these sects were based on the regional customs and rituals practiced by different peoples living in the northeast India. Of these sects, Jainism and Buddhism were the most important, and they emerged as the most potent religious reforms, religious reform movements. Causes of origin in post-Vedic times, society was clearly divided into four varnas: Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras. Each varna was assigned well-defined functions, although it was emphasized that varna was based on birth, and the two higher varnas were given some privileges. The Brahmanas, who were given the functions of priests and teachers, claimed the highest status in the society. They demanded several privileges, including those of receiving gifts and exemption from taxation and punishments. In post-Vedic times, in post-Vedic texts, we have many instances of such privileges enjoyed by them. The Kshatriyas ranked second in the Varna hierarchy. They fought and governed and lived on the taxes collected from the peasants. Okay. The Vaishyas were engaged in agriculture, cattle rearing, and trade. They appear as principal taxpayers. However, along with the two higher varnas, they were placed in the category of Dvija or the twice born. Okay, a Dvija was entitled to wearing sacred thread and studying the Vedas, from which Shudras were kept out. The Shudras were meant for serving the three higher varnas, and along with women were barred from taking to Vedic studies. Okay. They appear as domestic slaves, agricultural slaves, craftsmen, and hired laborers in the post Vedic times. They were called cruel, greedy, and thieving in habits, and some of them were treated as untouchables. The higher the Varna, the more privileged and a purer a person was. The lower the Varna of an offender, the more severe was the punishment prescribed for him. Naturally, the Varna divided society seems to have generated tensions. We have no means to find out the reactions of the Vaishyas and the Shudras. The Kshatriyas, who had acted as rulers, however, reacted strongly against ritualistic domination of the Brahmanas and seem to have led a kind of protest movement against the importance attached to birth in the Varna system. The Kshatriya reaction against the domination of the priestly class, called Brahmanas, who claimed various privileges, was one of the causes of the origin of new religions. Vardhamana Mahavira, who founded Jainism, and Gautama Buddha, who founded Buddhism, belonged to the Kshatriya clan, and both disputed the authority of Brahmanas. Okay. But the real cause of the rise of these new religions lay in the introduction of new agricultural economy in the northeastern India. Northeast India, including the regions of eastern Uttar Pradesh and northern and southern Bihar, has about 100 centimeters of rainfall. Before these areas came to be colonized on a large scale, they were thickly forested. The thick jungles could not be cleared without the aid of iron axes. Although some people lived in this area before 600 BC, they used implements of stone and copper, and they led precarious life on riverbanks and confluences, where land was open to settlement through the process of erosion and flooding. In the Middle Gangetic Basin, large-scale habitations began from about 600 BC, when iron came to be used in this area. On account of the moist nature of the soil in this area, too many iron tools of earliest times have not survived, but quite a few axes have been recovered from the layers belonging to circa 600 to 500 BC. The use of iron tools made possible clearance, agriculture, and large settlements. The agriculture economy based on the iron plow share required the use of bullocks, and it could not flourish without animal husbandry. But the Vedic practice of killing cattle indiscriminately in sacrifices stood in the way of progress of new agriculture. The cattle wealth slowly decimated because the cows and bullocks were killed in numerous Vedic sacrifices. The tribal people living on the southern and eastern fringes of Magadha also killed cattle for food. But if the new agrarian economy had to be stable, the killing had to be stopped. The period saw the rise of large number of cities in the northeastern India. We may refer, for example, Kaushambi near Allahabad, Kushinagar in the Deoria district of Uttar Pradesh, Banaras, Vaishali in the newly created district of the same name in North Bihar, Chirant in the Chapra district, and Rajgir, situated at the distance of about 100 kilometers from Patna. Besides others, these cities had many artisans and traders who began to use coins for the first time. The earliest coins belong to the 5th century BC, and they are called punch-marked coins. They circulated for the first time in eastern Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. The use of coins naturally facilitated trade and commerce, which added to the importance of the Vaishyas. In the Brahmanical society, the Vaishyas ranked third, the first two being Brahmanas and Kshatriyas. Naturally, they looked for some religion which would improve their position. The Vaishyas extended generous support to both Mahavira and Gautama Buddha. The Vaishyas extended generous support for both Mahavira and Gautama Buddha. The merchants called the Sethis made handsome gifts to Gautama Buddha and his disciples. There were several reasons for it. First, Jainism and Buddhism in the initial stage did not attach any importance to the existing Varna system. Second, they preached the gospel of non-violence, which would put an end to wars between the different kingdoms and consequently promote trade and commerce. Third, the Brahmanical law books called Dharma Sutras. Brahmanical law books are called Dharma Sutras. Decried lending money on in interest. A person who lived on interest was condemned by them. Therefore, the Vaishyas who lent money on account of growing trade and commerce were not held in esteem and were eager to improve their social status. On the other hand, we also notice a strong reaction against various forms of private property. Old-fashioned people did not like the use of accumulation of coins, made certainly of silver and copper, and possibly of gold. They detested new dwellings and dresses, new systems of transport which amounted to luxury, and they hated war and violence. The new forms of property created social inequalities and caused misery and suffering to the masses of the people. So the common people yearned to return to primitive life. They wanted to get back to the ascetic ideal, which dispensed with the new forms of property and the new style of life. Both Jainism and Buddhism preferred simple, Puritan, ascetic living. The Buddhist and Jaina monks were asked to forego the good things of life. They were not allowed to touch gold and silver. They were to accept only as much from their patrons as was sufficient to keep body and soul together. They therefore rebelled against the material advantages stemming from the new life in the Gangetic basin. In other words, we find the same kind of reaction against the changes in material life in northeastern India in the 6th century BC, as we notice against changes introduced by the Industrial Revolution in modern times. Just as the advent of Industrial Revolution made many people think of a return to the pre-machine age life. Similarly, people in the past wanted to return to the pre-Iron Age life. Vardhamana Mahavira and Jainism. Vardhamana Mahavira was born in 540 BC in a village near Vaishali, okay, which is identical with Basar in the district of Vaishali in North Bihar. His father was the head of a famous Kshatriya clan, and his mother a Lichavi princess. Okay. They were also connected with the royal family of Makatha. High connections made it easy for Mahavira to approach princes and nobles in the course of his mission. In the beginning, Mahavira led the life of a householder, but in the search of truth, he abandoned the world at the age of 30 and became an ascetic. He kept on wandering for 12 years from place to place. He would not stay for more than a day in a village and for more than 5 days in a town. During the course of his long journey, it is said He never changed his clothes for 12 years and abandoned them altogether when he attained perfect knowledge or kaivalya at the age of 42. Perfect knowledge or kaivalya at the age of 42. Through kaivalya, he conquered misery and happiness. Because of this conquest, he is known as Mahavira or the great hero or Jina, the conqueror, and his followers are known as Jainas. He propagated his religion for 30 years, and his mission took him to Kosala, Magadha, Mithila, Chamba, etc. He passed away at the age of 72 in 468 BC at a place called Pavapuri near modern Rajgir. Doctrines of Jainism. Jainism taught five doctrines, which are they? First, do not commit violence. Second, do not speak a lie. Third, do not steal. Fourth, do not acquire property. And fifth, observe continence or brahmacharya. It is said that only the fifth doctrine was added by Mahavira, the other four being taken over by him from previous teachers. Although Parshva, the predecessor of Mahavira, had asked his followers to cover the upper and lower portions of their body, Mahavira asked them to discard clothes completely. This implies that Mahavira asked his followers to lead a more austere life. On account of this, in later times, Jainism was divided into two sects: Shvedambaras, or those who put on white dress, and Digambaras, or those who keep themselves naked. Jainism recognized the extra existence of the gods but placed them lower than the Jina. Jainism recognized the existence of gods but placed them lower than the Jina. It did not condemn the Varna system as Buddhism did. So Buddhism condemned the Varna system, but Jainism did not. According to Mahavira, a person is born in a high or low or in a lower Varna in consequences of the sins or the virtues acquired by him in the previous birth. Mahavira looks for the values even in Chandala. In his opinion, through pure and meritorious life, members of the low caste can attain liberation. Jainism mainly aims at the attainment of freedom from worldly bonds. It is not necessary to use any ritual for acquiring such liberation. It can be obtained through full knowledge and action. Full knowledge, action, and liberation are considered to be three gems or ratnas of Jainism. Full knowledge, action, and liberation are considered to be three gems or ratnas of Jainism. Spread of Jainism. In order to spread the teachings of Jainism, Mahavira organized an order of his followers which admitted both men and women. It is said that his followers counted 14,000, which is not a large number. Since Jainism did not very clearly mark itself out from the Brahmanical religion, it failed to attract the masses. Despite this, Jainism gradually spread into South and West India. According to late tradition, the spread of Jainism in Karnataka is attributed to Chandragupta Maurya, 322 to 298 BC. The emperor became a Jaina, gave up his throne, and spent the last years of his life in Karnataka as a Jain ascetic. But this tradition is not corroborated by any other source. The second cause of the spread of Jainism in South India is said to be the Great Famine that took place in Magadha 200 years after the death of Mahavira. The famine lasted for 12 years, and so in order to protect themselves, many Jaina went to south under the leadership of Bhadrabahu, but the rest of them stayed in Magadha under the leadership of Stalabahu. Okay, the famine lasted for 12 years. So, in order to protect themselves, many Jaina went to the south under the leadership of Bhadrabahu, but the rest of them stayed back in Magadha under the leadership of Stalabahu. The immigrant Jainas spread Jainism in South India. At the end of the famine, they came back to Magadha, where they developed differences with the local Jainas. Those who came back from south claimed that even during the famine, they strictly observed the religious rules. On the other hand, they alleged the Jaina ascetics living in Magadha had violated those rules and become lax. In order to sort out these differences and to compile the main teachings of Jainism, a council was convened at Patliputra, modern Patna, but the southern Jainas boycotted the council and refused to accept its decisions. From now onwards, the southerners began to be called as Digambaras and the Magadhans Shvedambaras. However, epigraphic evidence for the spread of Jainism in Karnataka is not earlier than the 3rd century AD. In subsequent centuries, especially from the 6th century, numerous Jaina monastic establishments called Basadis sprang up in Karnataka and were granted land by the kings for their support. Jainism spread to Kalinga in Orissa in the 4th century BC, and in the 1st century BC, it enjoyed the patronage of Kalinga king Kharavela, who had defeated the princes of Andhra and Magadha. In the 2nd and 1st centuries BC, it also seems to have reached the southern districts of Tamil Nadu. In later centuries, Jainism penetrated Malwa, Gujarat, and Rajasthan. And even now, these areas have a good number of Jainas, mainly engaged in trade and commerce. Although Jainism did not win as much as much state patronage as Buddhism did, and did not spread very fast in early times, it still retains its hold in the areas where it spread. On the other hand, Buddhism has practically disappeared from the Indian subcontinent. Contribution of Jainism. Jainism made the first serious attempt to mitigate the evils of Varna order and the ritualistic Vedic religion. The early Jainas discarded Sanskrit language, mainly patronized by Brahmanas. They adopted Prakrit language of the common people to preach their doctrines. Their religious literature was written in Ardha Magadhi, and the texts were finally compiled in the 6th century AD in Gujarat at a place called Vallabhi. Okay, a great center of education. Vallabhi is a great center of education. The adoption of Prakrit by the Jainas helped the growth of his language and his literature. Many regional languages developed out of the Prakrit languages, particularly Sauraseni, out of which grew the Marathi language. The Jainas composed the earliest important works in Abhabramsha and its first grammar. The Jaina literature contains epics, Puranas, novels, and drama. A large portion of the Jaina writing is still in the form of manuscripts, which have not been established and which are found in the Jaina shrines of Gujarat and Rajasthan. In early medieval times, the Jainas also made good use of Sanskrit and wrote many texts in this language. Last but not the least, they contributed to the growth of Kannada, in which they wrote extensively. Gautama Buddha and Buddhism. Gautama Buddha or Siddhartha was a contemporary of Mahavira. He was born in 563 BC in Shakya Kshatriya family in Kapilavastu, which is situated in the foothills of Nepal. Gautama's father seems to have been the elected ruler of Kapilavastu and headed the Republican clan of the Sakyas. His mother was princess from the Kosalan dynasty. Thus, like Mahavira, Gautama also belonged to a noble family. Born in a republic, he also inherited some republican sentiments. From his early childhood, Gautama showed a meditative bent of mind. He was married early, but married life did not interest him. He was moved by the misery which people suffered in the world and looked for solution. At the age of 29, like Mahavira again, he left home. He kept on wandering for about 7 years and they then attained knowledge at the age of 35 at Bodh Gaya under a peepal tree. From this time onwards, he began to be called the Buddha or the Enlightened. Gautama Buddha delivered his first sermon at Sarnath in Banaras. He undertook long journeys and took his message far and wide. He had a very strong physique, which enabled him to walk 20 to 30 kilometers a day. He kept on wandering, preaching and meditating continuously for 40 years, resting only in the rainy season. Every year, During this long period, he encountered many staunch supporters of rival sects, including the Brahmanas, but defeated them in debates. His missionary activities did not discriminate between the rich and poor, the high and the low, the man and the woman. Gautama Buddha passed away at the age of 80 in 483 BC at a place called Kushinagar, identical with the village called Kasia in the district of Dioria in the eastern Uttar Pradesh. Doctrines of Buddhism. The Buddha proved to be a practical reformer who took note on the realities of the day. He did not involve himself in fruitless controversies regarding the soul, Atman, and Brahma, which raged strongly in his time. He addressed himself to the worldly problems. He said that the world is full of sorrows and people suffer on account of desires. If desires are conquered, nirvana will be attained. That is, man will be free from the cycle of birth and death. Gautama Buddha recommended an eightfold path, Ashtanga Marga, Ashtangiga Marga, for the elimination of human misery. This path is attributed to him in a text about the 3rd century BC. It comprised right observation, right determination, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right exercise, right memory, and right meditation. If a person follows this eightfold path, he would not depend on the machinations of the priests, and yet he will be able to reach his destination. Gautama taught that a person should avoid the excess of both luxury and austerity. He prescribed the middle path. The Buddha also laid down a code of conduct for his followers on the same lines as was done by the Jaina teachers. The main items in this social conduct are: do not covet the property of others, do not commit violence, do not use intoxicants, do not speak a lie, and do not indulge in corrupt practices. These teachings are common to the social conduct ordained by almost all religions. Special features of Buddhism and the causes of its spread. Buddhism does not recognize the existence of God and soul, Atman. Buddhism does not recognize the existence of God and soul. This can be taken as a kind of revolution in the history of Indian religions. Since the early Buddhism, was not enmeshed in the claptrap of philosophical discussion. It appealed to the common people. It particularly won the support of lower orders as it attacked the Varna system. People were taken into the Buddhist order without any consideration of caste. Women were also admitted to the Sangha, thus brought on a par with women. In comparison with Brahmanism, Buddhism was liberal and democratic. Buddhism made a special appeal to the people of the non-Vedic areas where it found a virgin soil of conversion. The people of Magadha responded readily to the Buddhism because they were looked down upon by the Orthodox Brahmanas. Magadha was placed outside the pale of the holy Aryavarta, the land of Aryas, covering modern Uttar Pradesh. The old traditions persist, and the people of North Bihar would not like to be cremated south of the Ganga in Magadha. The personality of the Buddha and the method adopted by him to preach his religion helped the spread of Buddhism. He tried to fight evil by goodness and hatred by love. He refused to be provoked by slander and abuse. He maintained poise and calm under difficult conditions and tackled his opponents with wit and presence of mind. It is said that on one occasion, an ignorant person abused him. The Buddha listened on silently, and when the person had stopped abusing, the Buddha asked, "My son, if a person does not accept a present, what will happen to it?" He adversary replied, "It remains with the person who has offered it." The Buddha then said, "My son, I do not accept your abuse." The use of Pali, the language of the people, also contributed to the spread of Buddhism. It facilitated the spread of Buddhist doctrines among the common people. Gautama Buddha also organized Sangha, or the religious order, whose doors were kept open to everybody, irrespective of caste and sex. The only condition required for the monks that was that they would faithfully observe the rules and regulations of the sanghas. Once they enrolled as members of the Buddhist church, they enrolled. They had to take the vow of continence, poverty, and faith. So there are three main elements in Buddhism: Buddha, Sangha, and Dhamma. As a result of organized preaching under the auspices of the Sangha, Buddhism made rapid strides even in the lifetime of the Buddha. The monarchies of Magadha, Kosala, and Kausambi, and several republican states and their people adopted this religion. The 200 years after the death of Buddha, the famous Maurya king Ashoka embraced Buddhism. Okay, this was an epoch-making event. Through his events, Ashoka spread Buddhism into Central Asia, West Asia, and Sri Lanka, then thus transformed it into a world religion. Even today, Sri Lanka, Burma, Tibet, and parts of China and Japan profess Buddhism. Although Buddhism disappeared from the land of its birth, it continues to hold ground in the countries of South Asia, Southeast Asia, and East Asia. Causes of the decline of Buddhism. Causes of the decline of Buddhism. By the 12th century AD, Buddhism became practically extinct in India. It continued to exist in a changed form in Bengal and Bihar till 12th century. But after that, this religion almost completely vanished from the country. What were its causes? We find that in the beginning, every religion is inspired by the spirit of reform, but eventually it succumbs to rituals and ceremonies it originally denounced. Buddhism underwent a similar metamorphosis. It became a victim to the evils of Brahmanism, against which it had fought in the beginning. To meet the Buddhist challenge, the Brahmanas reformed their religion. They stressed the need for preserving the cattle wealth and assured women and Shudras of admission to heaven. Buddhism, on the other hand, changed for the worse. Gradually, the Buddhist monks were cut off from the mainstream of people's life. They gave up Pali, the language of the people, and took to Sanskrit, the language of intellectuals. From the first century AD, they practiced idol worship on a large scale and received numerous offerings from devotees. The rich offerings, supplemented by generous royal grants to the Buddhist monasteries, made the life of monks easy. Some of the monasteries, such as Nalanda, collected revenue from as many as 200 villages. By the 7th century AD, the Buddhist monasteries had come to be dominated by the ease-loving people and became centers of corrupt practices which Gautam Buddha had strictly prohibited. The new form of Buddhism was known as Vajrayana. The enormous wealth of the monasteries, with women living in them, led to further degeneration. Buddhists came to look upon women as objects of lust. The Buddha is reported to have said to his favorite disciple Ananda, if women were not admitted into the monasteries, Buddhism would have continued for thousands of years. But because this admission has been granted, it would last only 500 years. For their riches, the monasteries came to be coveted by the Turkish invaders. They became special targets of the invaders' greed. The Turks killed a large number of Buddhist monks in Nalanda, although some of the monks managed to escape to Nepal and Tibet. In any case, by 12th century AD, Buddhism had practically disappeared from the land of its birth. Importance and influence of Buddhism. Despite its ultimate disappearance as an organized religion, Buddhism left its abiding mark on the history of India. The Buddhists showed a keen awareness of the problems that faced the people of Northeast India in the 6th century BC. The new iron plowshare agriculture, trade, and use of coins enabled the traders and nobles to accumulate wealth. And we hear of people possessing 8 kotis of wealth. All this naturally created sharp social and economic inequalities. So Buddhism asked people not to accumulate wealth. According to it, Poverty breeds hatred, cruelty, and violence. To eradicate these evils, Buddha advised that farmers should be provided with grain and the other facilities, the traders with wealth, and the laborers with wages. These measures were recommended to remove poverty in this world. Buddhism further taught that if the poor gave alms to the monks, they would be born wealthy in the next world. The code of conduct prescribed for the monks represents a reaction against the material conditions of the northeast India in the 6th and 5th century BC. It imposes restrictions on the food, dress, and sexual behavior of the monks. They cannot accept gold and silver, and they cannot take to sale and purchase. These rules were relaxed after the death of Buddha, but the easy rules suggest a return to a kind primitive communism, a characteristic of the tribal society in which people did not practice trade and plow agriculture. The code of conduct prescribed for monks partially reflects a revolt against the use of money, private property, and luxurious living, which appeared in the 6th century BC in Northeast India. In those days, property and money were regarded as luxurious, although Buddhism tried to mitigate the evils resulting from the new material life in the 6th century BC. It also tried to consolidate the changes in the social and economic life of the people. The rule that debtors were not permitted to be members of the Sangha naturally helped the moneylenders and richer sections of the society from those from whose clutches the debtors would not be saved. Similarly, the rule that slaves could not join the Sangha helped the slave owners. Thus, the rules of teachings of Gautama Buddha took full account of the new changes in the material life and strengthened them ideologically. Although the Buddhist monks had renounced the world and repeatedly criticized the greedy Brahmanas, in several ways they resembled the Brahmanas. Both of them did not participate directly in production and lived on the alms of or gifts from given by society. Both of them emphasized the virtues of carrying out family obligations, protecting private property, and respecting political authority. Both of them supported the social order based on classes. For the monks, however, the Varna was based on action and attributes, but for the Brahmanas, it was based on birth. Undoubtedly, the objective of the Buddhist teaching was to secure the salvation of the individual or nirvana. Those who found it difficult to adjust themselves to the breakup of the old tribal society and the rise of gross social inequalities on account of private property were provided with some way of escape, but it was confined to the monks. No escape was provided for the lay followers who were taught to come to terms with the existing situation. Buddhism made an important impact on the society by keeping its doors open to women and Shudras. Since both women and Shudras were replaced in the same category by Brahmanism, they were neither given sacred thread nor allowed to read the Vedas. Their conversion to Buddhism freed from such mark of inferiority, with its emphasis on non-violence, and the sanctity of animal life. Buddhism boosted the cattle wealth of the country. The earliest Buddhist text, Suttanipada, declares the cattle to be givers of food, beauty, and happiness. Annada, Vannada, Sukkada, and thus pleads for their protection. This teaching came significantly at a time when the non-Aryans slaughtered animals for food and the Aryans in the name of religion. The Brahmanical insistence on the sacredness of the cow and non-violence was apparently derived from Buddhist teachings. Buddhism created and developed a new awareness in the field of intellect and culture. It taught the people not to take things for granted, but to argue and judge them on merits. To a certain extent, the place of superstition was taken by logic. This promoted rationalism among people. In order to praise the doctrines of new religion, the Buddhists compiled a new type of literature. They enormously enriched Pali by their writings. The early Pali literature can be divided into three categories. The first contains sayings and teachings of Buddha. The second contains deals with the rules to be observed by the members of the Sangha. And the third presents the philosophical exposition of the Dharma. The literary activities of the Buddhist monks continued even in the Middle Ages, and some famous Abhabramsha writings in East India were composed by them. The Buddhist monasteries developed as great centers of learning and can be called residential universities. Mention may be made of Nalanda and Vikramashila in Bihar and Vallabhi in Gujarat. Buddhism Buddhism left its mark on Buddhism left its mark on the art of ancient India. The first human statues worshipped in India were probably those of the Buddha. The faithful devotees portrayed the various events in the life of the Buddha in stone. The panels found at Gaya in Bihar and Sanji and Barhut in Madhya Pradesh are illuminating examples of artistic activity. From the first century AD, the panel images of Gautam Buddha began to be made. The Greek and the Indian sculptures worked together to create a new kind of art on the northwest frontier of India, which is known as Gandhara art. The images made in this region betray Indian as well as foreign influence. For the residents of the monks, rooms were hewn out of the rocks and thus began the cave architecture in Barabar Hills in Gaya and western India around Nasik. Under the impetus Roman trade, Buddhist art flourished in the Krishna Delta, and under the Central Asian contacts, it thrive in the Madura and Gandhara. Okay, thank you for listening me. We will in the next video we will discuss chapter 10, territorial states and the first Magadhan Empire. Thank you for listening me. We'll see you in next class. Thank you very much.